July is here, July 2024. It's a month where we're ramping up. We start the month with some calmer energy. We start the month with this restful Cancer stellium energy. And then this month just ramps up. It accelerates week by week by week. So by the end of the month, we are in this Mars Saturn square dynamic that comes to really shock us into the second part of the summer, the end of the summer, and then into the fall as things just get more and more dynamic as the speed picks up. And so it's that malefic mutable square that arrives by sign by the end of the month. It's a month of picking up tension, picking up speed into what is likely to be some kind of chaotic August, very much so. So the first major theme of the month is the Leo Stellium. The lion roars this month, where we have 3 planets moving through Leo. And there's this stellium of planets that arrive. We've got Mercury entering Leo on the 2nd of July. We've got Venus entering Leo on the 11th of July. And so we're shifting here the first part of this month out from the restful nurturance of the moon's domicile, the water domicile, into this solar selfhood, the fire of personality, the fire within as we go out into the world with our bright sense of identity and make moves, share who we are with others. It's a bold energy. It's from nurturance to boldness, nurturance to boldness. And so part of this boldness, this bold energy that arrives are the sextiles to Jupiter and Gemini. We're going to perfect a series of sextiles. Mercury will sextile Jupiter on the 8th of July. Venus sextiles Jupiter on the 21st of July. So it's not just that bold, fiery sense of self, it's how that will be supported by an interface with these expansions of curiosity, the ability to not only go out into the outer world with our selfhood, but then also flow into the new information that's been given to us and all these expansive ways to articulate and notate our selfhood. And so think about it, you know who you are, that fixed fire, that Leo energy, and then you go out into the world with it, but you get instant feedback. You get scrutiny of the identity. You get maybe people saying, hey, that's not how you are, or experiences that inform that identity. That's mutable air, new ideas and the shifting nature of language and of information flow and the curiosity. That shifting nature informs that fixed fire. Expansions of knowledge of all kinds, expansions of experiences, how those can help with the self-identification process. The Leo 9 roar will be constantly tweaked here, I think, with that Jupiter sextile from Gemini. Venus also, this is a big part of the Leo story in July as well, is that Venus will emerge from the sun's beams. Remember that last year, Venus experienced a full retrograde in Leo. So on the 29th of July, right at the end of the month, Venus still in Leo, it emerges and becomes visible. We now get Venus as an evening star, that glowing goddess. You've got to look at it every night here in August and for the rest of the year. You get a glowing goddess Venus. It's one of my favorite things in all of astrology in terms of that visual relationship with the sky. And this is where Venus stationed retrograde last summer and had a full cycle there in Leo. And so we're returning maybe to some of that rebirth of that identity that we had last year. We get Venus now emerging, and it's a good way to check in with ourselves. I think a good point of timing to realize just how far you've come since last August, September, and where you're at now with that new part of yourself, or those new parts of yourself that were reborn then. Now it's time to really shine those, maybe having had a year to try them on and to have your new clothes on. I think that debutante ball, right? Venus just shows up with that dress, like prom. I've seen people talking about prom in the recent weeks, or anything else like that you've ever done where you get dolled up and then you present yourself. This is one major theme of the month, and that happens right at the end of the month. Of course, the sun also enters Leo on the 22nd of July, and then we'll get a little bit of that stellium for 3 days before Mercury enters Virgo. So that peak of that Leo energy is the 22nd to the 25th with 3 planets there. Subset of all this Leo stellium energy here in July are the oppositions to Pluto. Remember, Pluto's still in Aquarius. Pluto's been in Aquarius for since January, and it's just hanging out there now, retrograde, coming back to Capricorn for a few weeks here in September, October, and into November. But Pluto will make oppositions, and so you think about a Leo stellium for a portion of the month of July, and all of the planets have to oppose. Mercury 3rd of July, Venus opposes on the 12th of July, the sun on the 23rd of July. You might think about it, the king symbolism of Leo and the sun, now having to push back against that collective new idea set, which is Aquarius. And so we may see things like the rise of the king in response to revolutions. I mean, this year has been revolutionary number of ways, as you've had protest movements of all kinds, pushing back against the old guard and certain regimes of power. have been identified and have gotten pushed back. Maybe here you have old models emerging to counter in response to the revolutions we've seen. Remember, Pluto and Aquarius in the 16th century saw the rise of the Jesuit order, right? The Catholic Church produces a Jesuit order to counterbalance the Protestant Reformation. Something like this may be coming online. And you might think about it this way too. Planets in Leo, Venus visible in Leo, the sun in Leo where it has its domicile. This is the identity in the self, like we've said before. Who is the new you in this new revolutionary time of Pluto and Aquarius? What is your selfhood that's rising to meet the challenges and rising to meet all of the changes in reality? There's some kind of interplay here between the personal experience of these collective changes. There's something in astrology where you've got two levels of reality always. You have the collective manifestation of a transit and then the interpersonal manifestation. And it's always good to just be thinking about our own selfhood, even in a very dynamic time in the world. 2 wars, only growing, only expanding. This has been a banner month for these mundane events that seem to be creeping into some kind of climax here. I've been talking to a lot of people saying you can just feel it coming, given news about NATO and the new alliances with Russia and Vietnam, the new alliances with Russia and North Korea, the new groupings around NATO and NATO countries reforming. South Korea may be sending weapons to Ukraine. The lines are kind of being drawn, the pieces are being set up. And then the final theme here is that it's the sci-fi trope, the classic trope of the sci-fi story, Brave New World, 1984, The Matrix. It's always about individual identity and how that fits into these techno-dystopian states where you have kind of collective prisons. And then the main character, for example, Winston Smith in 1984, there's scenes in the film and in the novel where they're getting to experience real food, sex, things that are very human and essential to the human identity. Those might be known or celebrated here at a time when Leo can oppose Pluto and Aquarius. So look for that, your true humanity to shine through. You know, what does it mean to truly be a human being? That's the primary question of Pluto and Aquarius, is a revamped selfhood, a revamped humanity, our true human nature being identified, the contours of it. Pluto comes to shine a light on that and make it expand and grow in ways we haven't understood before. So figure that out for you. Maybe you get some of that here with all of the Leo energy to counterbalance some of the heavier weights of Pluto and Aquarius. And so the next main story of the month is the sun squaring those lunar nodes. We activate these eclipse stories, a little bit of gyrations and echoes, and that's what it means to have cardinal activation. You have a new moon on the 5th of July right in Cancer. And so that cardinal axis is getting refreshed. One of the nodes of that cardinal cross will be triggered here. So July, what are the 2 signs that most of these faster moving planets are spending time in? That is to say Venus, Mercury, and the sun. Well, it's Cancer, the beginning of the month, but then into Leo. And so this whole period as well is a preview of this Mars retrograde story. Now Mars is in Taurus now, but we're getting pings in these sectors of our charts that Mars will come dig up and renew and revitalize. Here, that new moon in Cancer on the 5th of July, it's a lovely new moon. You have Venus still in Cancer with the luminaries. Venus in its sign of triplicity. The home becomes a place for pleasure where we can put on our clothes and show our beauty in the confines of our safe home environment. Very early in the month, on the 2nd of July, right here out of the gate, that the sun will square those lunar nodes. And then of course at the end of the month, a little bit of a difficult full moon with Mars and Saturn now by sign squaring each other. And of course it's the second of 2 full moons in Capricorn this summer. So we're, by the end of July, done with that Capricorn house that's been doubly activated with these 2 full moons. The next theme is the Mercury retrograde story that begins here in July. By sign, the Mercury retrograde begins right at the beginning of the month upon Mercury entering Leo, because that's the sign where Mercury stations direct. So we begin those stories of our Leo sector having to have this renewal of idea set and of notation and of data that Mercury implies, of speech and of language around our identity. That retrograde of Mercury there will help us articulate the self, and that comes later, of course, in August. But here in July, we'll have Mercury entering Leo. Like I said, on the 2nd of July, Mercury enters its shadow on the 17th of July, 21 degrees. So the retrograde stories at that point might become more apparent. Mercury will then enter Virgo on the 25th of July. And so that end of the month moment of Mercury in Virgo, it's a preview of the powers that we're going to have in September when Mercury re-enters Virgo. And we have this whole renewed Mercury in the sign that it rules. Our Virgo sector is one of the major players here in September where the big opportunities can come. And then of course Mercury will enter Libra in September, so that the retrograde will really be over by September. But we're talking about July in this video, so it's 2nd of July by sign that Mercury retrograde begins, and it's going to be a long process of renewal in both Virgo and Leo. You know, so in that sense, July is really a prep month, because anytime Mercury is slowing and about to station retrograde, which in this case it does on 5 August, it's time to get our affairs in order, our papers in order, our planning in order, the backups that we'll need to do of data and everything of that nature. All the mercurial preparations, you can view it as a major theme here in July, is preparing for that backwardization that August will bring. Technology, communication, and thought. It's time to really settle that here. I mean, I'll be backing up my data, I always do, right before Mercury stations retrograde. It's a great way to syncopate data backups and organizing papers. 3 times a year you get to do it, and you time it with these station retrogrades of Mercury. July is the final month of a wholly direct Mercury until September. And that's a theme of astrology, of why we use astrology. We use it as a timing technology. We syncopate our lives, the importance of phases and the flows and the ebbs. It's like waves in the ocean. The tide goes in, the tide goes out. The waves are hitting you when you're in the water, the waves are not hitting you. And we can syncopate our lives similarly to how nature has cycles, and astrology is nature. We measure the materiality of the natural world in astrology, and that's how we derive symbolic meaning. And remember, August is going to be crazy. August is this moment where you have both the malefic Mars Saturn square, but then this Mercury retrograde idea of reflection and pause. So August is going to be a really wild mix of some energies, and get ready for it. July is the month to do that. You know, something like the film Groundhog Day, where you just wake up and do it all over again. By the end of July, we're getting into those zones where we might have to repeat some things, and that's okay. You know, the Mars Saturn square in August may require some kind of jolt that forces repetition in a way. Next major theme is the Saturn retrograde story. Saturn's been in the degree of its retrograde all of June, or most of June. I think it was the 7th or 8th when it entered 19 degrees. It stationed retrograde, I believe, on the 29th, Saturn did, of June. But here in July, Saturn stays in 19 degrees Pisces pretty much all month. All of July, it's still in that same degree. The difference here in July is that Saturn has support of these faster moving planets. There's sextiles that are made to Saturn in Pisces. So it's sextiles and trines to Saturn in the degree of its retrograde station, now retrograde. You've got trines from Venus in Cancer. We'll trine Saturn on the 3rd of July. You'll have Mars sextiling Saturn on the 5th of July, and then the Sun will trine Saturn on the 11th of July. Trines and sextiles to support Saturn in that degree. And so anytime a Saturn station happens, it changes in the reality. Saturn is our reality, right? Visible planet that's the slowest. As it stops, we get these pivots. The shifting seas of the Piscean, as Saturn is getting washed there, and it's trippy, and it's unknown, and it's surreal, and it's Lynchian. Now we have some kind of support to help us maybe stabilize a little bit of a rudder here. You know, these new home worlds we're making. Mars is in Taurus, Venus and the Sun in Cancer. What are those? Moon-ruled signs. We're talking about home. We're talking about comfort and safety. And you think about in art, this is always a story. It's the journey into the surreal, and the notion is trying to find our way home, right? Trying to figure out where we can come back to some kind of stable land, or a place where we are supported and nourished. Things like the Odyssey by Homer, the story where Odysseus is out on a journey trying to come home. Things like The Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy wakes up and isn't in Kansas anymore, and she's in this surreal Saturn and Pisces realm saying, hey, I want to go home, I want to go home, tapping her feet, you know, let me go home, please, the slippers. And so think about that here, as we might be finding a little bit of a sense of a vision of home, or a little bit of a calling back to where we're trying to land here in our reality, in our personal lives, and in the collective. I think we need it tremendously. What does it look like to have a world that's supportive of humanity, absent war, absent genocide, absent all of the horrific things we're confronted with in our current moment of time? So, you know, finding our way home, making our way back to where we need to be. So the next big theme in July's astrology are the activations to Uranus in Taurus. It's a major story here because Uranus is a planet of shock and upheaval and surprise. A month where there's a few aspects directly to that Uranus and Taurus. We must be prepared for some kind of unexpected event. I mean, we hope nothing happens, but it's definitely on the bingo card here in July. And particularly with the mundane astrology, because of the Uranus and Taurus story 80 years ago was, of course, World War II and the triggers and kickoffs of World War II. And so we're hearkening back to a real difficult period historically. Venus will sextile Uranus right here out of the gate, 8th July. And this sextile may help us stabilize a little bit for the shocks that could potentially come later with Mars meeting Uranus and Taurus, the conjunction of Mars and Uranus. The last conjunction of Mars and Uranus in Taurus, while Uranus is in Taurus, this cycle of Uranus through Taurus. Just as an example, the last time Mars and Uranus conjoined in Taurus back, the last time Uranus was there was 1942. We were talking about a year 1942 resonant to the year 2024. And of course, what's happening in 42, it's post Pearl Harbor. It's a lot of that ramp up in World War II. We're seeing the wars in our current cycle, right in the same part of the world. So we've got to be watchful of some kind of ramping up. Pray for peace is a main theme. Remember Taurus, it's the material realm. It's the fixity around the material realm. It's the stability in our lives in terms of the material structures. And to have a shock, Mars and Uranus meeting, you know, I hope this doesn't happen in too much of a negative sense for folks out there, but what if there's gyrations around what we've been used to as Mars and Uranus meet to sort of shake those things up? The Sun will sextile Uranus 3 days after Mars conjoins on the 18th. Maybe that settles things a little bit. And then Mercury, of course, will square from Leo on the 21st. So maybe we're back to some gyration. Just be prepared for shock and surprise in material matters. Revolutionary forces, I think. What if something gets triggered in July and then it sets up Mars's entry into Gemini on the 20th of July, and now we're into some real dynamic, difficult, you know, facing off energy. So of course brings us to the final theme of the month, Mars entering Gemini. Mars now in a malefic mutable square with Saturn. This is major because it sets up the August perfections of these aspects where Jupiter will perfect a square to Saturn, Mars will conjoin Jupiter. But as we get here after the 20th, when Mars enters Gemini, those stories may even kick up right away. Sometimes it's not the perfected aspect, it is all of the period leading up to it or even after it. That's why we have to use sign-based aspects in my view. I see it over and over again with people that if you exclude sign-based aspects, you lose the meat of a story. It's the last 11 days of July that take on a completely different quality. There's a much different speed, so it's faster, more chaotic, maybe more strain potentially. So you've got to be prepared for it. And that's why one of the major themes I've shared in the last video and the live I did was letting this restful late June, early July with all of the Cancer energy, let that do work for you. Kind of rest if you're able to. I know it might be hard. We still have that Jupiter-Saturn square happening. But try to rest because that last 11 days of July could kick up a lot. And so this is the first Mars and Gemini transit since it was retrograde there completely. End of 2022, beginning of 2023, that full renewal of our Gemini sector that Mars gave us. Now Mars is back. And so maybe we're checking in with some of the problems or challenges of that period, some of the renewed action, and we get to double up, double down, or extend what was built back at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023. I think here about The Labyrinth, the film with David Bowie. Great movie, isn't it? Jim Henson's movie from the 80s. I grew up with this film watching it. Jennifer Connelly, a young Jennifer Connelly. So in this case, Jareth, the David Bowie character, would be Saturn, right? He's the king of the Matrix, kind of the Time Lord of that labyrinthine system. And Jennifer Connelly is having to fight through a bunch of challenges and obstacles using her curiosity and ingenuity. And that would be the Mars-Jupiter conjunction in Gemini, having to get, you know, curious and get specific and expand with the knowledge and get tricky. That's the theme of Gemini. Mars is the wars that we might come across. And that she's presented with all kinds of obstacles that are quite martial. And so just look for this. I mean, the Goblin King may be setting traps for you here in July, and these traps may be building. And it's okay. Mars can help us power through. Mars is as much of the way we can push back, that we can fight battles, that we can deploy our mind and our language to expand into truth and wisdom and justice. And the square is ultimately productive. You know, Saturn in Pisces wants to show you a new realm, wants to give you some new foundation when it's all said and done. And so this month would be a month to let some of the uncertainty around that trigger up so that it can be seen and incorporated and integrated into the story of our Saturn and Pisces moment. All right, so that's July 2024's astrology. Very happy to be with you and laying some of the energies out here for you. Have a wonderful month of astrology. So you can always go to my website, sjanderson144.com, if you want to talk about your world and your life in specificity as it relates to your natal chart. Schedule readings with me there, right there at the top. Click here to schedule a reading. And then finally, I want to mention my videographer, my very cherished videographer. You might have noticed my channel this year has taken on quite a creative turn, and a lot of the stuff I've done outside, a lot of the creative shots you've seen have been solely because of my videographer, David, who is getting ready to attend the School of Arts Vienna, the same school that Hitler was denied twice. And he's got a GoFundMe going, and so I want to shout him out. If you have some extra resources, I know some of you out there are well situated, see if you can support him, because he's got a big project he's working on documenting the elders of Albania. He's a portrait photographer, and so he's done quite a lot of beautiful portraiture, and is raising some funds to be able to extend that project and drive all over Albania, where he is from, and help him get settled into Vienna for the fall semester of art school. So that link is in the description. Support David if you can, and have a lovely, lovely July, everyone. Wild times, wild astrology, and I'm gonna try to be here as much as I can. So peace be with you, take care, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.